cleansing of Palestine has been brutally escalated over the last 10 days or so. Already nearly 3,000 Palestinian civilians have lost their lives, including 1,000 children. I believe approximately 400,000 Palestinians have been displaced, and large parts of Gaza City have been razed. Because of the roster of the speakers, I won't extend my introduction any further. Instead, I'll say each speaker has 5 minutes initially. After everybody's spoken, we can have a round of questions, a discussion. And I expect the session to last around 90 minutes. If I can introduce each speaker in the turn, in the order in which they'll speak. First will be Dr. Norman Finkelstein, who teaches political science at Brooklyn College. After Professor Ilan Pape, who teaches history, excuse me, at the University of Exeter. Then Mike Peled, an Israeli historian and political scientist. And then Dr. Nadia Najeb, who lectures at the European Centre for Palestinian Studies, also at the University of Exeter. After Bill Law, who's the editor of Arab Digest. Adam Shapiro, who's director of advocacy for Israel-Palestine at Democracy for the Arab World Now in Washington, D.C. Ahmed Abu Fool, an advocacy officer at Al-Haq. After Ahmed, Rami Shaf, who's a Palestinian Egyptian activist. Mahmoud Wahaba, an Egyptian economist and entrepreneur. And then Naima Al-Qudcha, I hope I pronounced that second name correctly, who is a PhD student, also at Exeter. If that's all right with everybody, Dr. Finkelstein, after you. And you're muted.
Dr. Norman, you are muted. We cannot hear you.
Norman, if on the bottom left of your Zoom app, there should be a mute toggle. If we go to Professor Pape and then Dr. Finkelstein, we can come back to you in 5 minutes.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me for this important webinar. I understand that I have 5 minutes to begin with, so I will try and be brief. Excuse me. I was asked to focus on the media coverage of the event, so I suppose all kinds of other aspects will be discussed by others. I want to focus on one particular aspect of what is going on. And this is the difference between compassion, solidarity, and unconditional support for genocidal policies. The most important thing that comes out from the Western media coverage of the event is, to my mind, a misunderstanding how what might be sometimes be genuine solidarity with victims, in this case, the Israeli victims to begin with, in the morning of the 7th of October 2023, misunderstanding that kind of solidarity and the way it is presented and the context in which it is presented, namely a show of solidarity or even compassion that was never shown towards the Palestinians when they were victims of Israeli criminal policies, is understood in Israel as a carte blanche and a license to exercise on the ground any criminal policy that they deem right at this particular morning. So when you don the House of Parliament or the Eiffel Tower with the colors of the Israeli flag, the message is read by both policymakers in Israel and the public opinion as a carte blanche, a total unconditional support for genocidal policies in Gaza. And the reason that there is this probably gap between what quite a few people in the Western media would have liked to convey and the way it is understood in Israel is the result of a very long history of Western media's misunderstanding at best or total disregard at worst for the Palestinian plight and the real intentions of Israel or the nature of Israel and the Zionist movement over the years. I think that the most important challenge one can offer at this very moment is to bring back the context in which the events in Saturday happened and the context in which one should understand the Israeli policies right now. And the context is what the Palestinians call rightly since what the Palestinians frame as the ongoing catastrophe or the ongoing Nakba, which began in 1948. So we have 75 years in which Israel as a settler colonial state is very loyal to a policy of the eliminatory policy of Palestine and the Palestinians. It takes various forms according to circumstances and in different historical junctures, but the basic aim of any settler colonial movement to have as much of the land of the indigenous people with as few of the indigenous people in it has basically not changed since the very inception of Zionism, as well as the Palestinian resistance to this ideology and vision. And if you take this into context, you can separate between your understanding of a particular event and the wider context in which to analyze the Palestinian resistance in all its forms, as well as the Israeli policies before the action in Saturday and after the action on Saturday. So at every given moment, I think we should counter any analysis in the mainstream media that tries to decontextualize the events of Saturday, that tries to take the high moral ground, even if some of us probably do not accept some of the actions that were taken by the Hamas on that Saturday. We should never be ignorant of the wider context of the Palestinian resistance, of which the political Islamic movements were always an organic part of it and will continue to be an organic part of it. And if we don't go to an analysis, even in a soundbite analysis in the media, to the source of the violence, and we take this like the Western media does, the high moral ground in a hypocritical and a double speak kind of way, then the only message coming from the Western media to Israel is that you can continue with genocidal policies with and be immunized for any serious rebuke or condemnation. And I think that this is important because and with this I will end, if I understand correctly, the Israeli strategy in the next few days is not to go on a big onslaught in Gaza, but rather incremental occupation of the Gaza Strip, slice by slice, with typical Israeli war crimes that are on a much smaller scale than they are now, and within a very long period of time, which in many ways mesmerizes international public opinion and does not allow it to focus too much when the big dramatic events are being replaced by a policy that will continue probably for months. And this is when the Western media would be even less interested in what goes on and even less willing to take the wider context I was talking about into account. So finally, I would say we all should be alert. Israel is about to continue genocidal policies on the ground against Gaza and its people. And we unfortunately will not be able to rely on the Western media, mainstream media, to give us an accurate picture. Would not be able to use it to alert the world to the crimes committed on the ground. And we all should find other ways in order to influence an international regional intervention, which is the only way to stop the Israeli genocidal policy from materializing on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Professor Pav. Dr. Finkelstein, are you able to unmute?
Yes. Okay. You'll have to excuse me. I'm pre-committed, so I have to leave at 1:30 because I made several commitments beforehand, before I was informed. I think there are three ways to conceive what happened on October 7th. There are three aspects to it. Number one is the factual one. And there we know quite a lot at this point, but certainly we don't have an exhaustive understanding of what happened on that day. Then there is, excuse me, then there is the legal aspect. And the legal aspect will be left to lawyers, what kinds of crimes were committed and what levels or degrees of culpability there are. But then there's a third aspect, because law often lags behind morality. And then there is that third aspect of morality. And the moral judgment is, of course, the one that's is haziest and most elusive. And when you're presented with a situation like what happened on October 2nd, it seems to me that the best thing you can do under the situation is look for analogies, more or less close analogies, no analogy being perfect. So, my own view, for what it's worth, we start with the basic facts. Gaza is not a foreign entity. Gaza is not a foreign state. It is untrue that the state of Israel is under attack by a foreign entity or a foreign state. Gaza is a part of the state of Israel. There is one state from the Mediterranean to the Jordan River, and Gaza is part of that state. So we can set aside the various claims that are made about a quote unquote state of war, to the extent that state of war means two separate entities or two separate states. I think the closest analogy, it's not perfect, but I think it's pretty good, is to describe what happened in Gaza as a slave revolt. I won't go into the conditions of the people. I won't go into the conditions inside Gaza. Everybody here is more or less familiar with them. Obviously, the analogy is not perfect because Gazans were actually less than slaves, since they weren't put in a state of servitude in order to supply labor. They were basically left in Gaza they were consigned and confined to Gaza in order to languish and die. But I still believe the analogy holds up on many grounds. And then the question is, what can we learn from the history of slave revolts? Because what happened in Gaza was on October 7th was effectively a slave revolt. As for myself, I went back and looked at the largest slave revolt in the United States, and that was the one led by Nat Turner, the Nat Turner Rebellion in 1831. And if you look at the Nat Turner Rebellion, there are actually quite close analogies to what happened in Gaza. Nat Turner was apparently a quite intelligent person. He also was what you might call a religious zealot. Less flatteringly, he would be called a religious fanatic. He was convinced that he was an instrument of God, that God had called upon him to lead the slave revolt, and that all of his actions were sanctioned by God. Now, the actual revolt by Nat Turner, according to a very good historian, he said that Nat Turner's instructions to the other rebels was, quote, kill all whites. And that's what the rebels proceeded to do. By the end of their rebellion, they had killed roughly 60 whites, men, women, and children. Before I proceed, I would just want to make a side comment that the Nat Turner rebellion is now occupies an honored place in American history. Now, it's possible that not everybody's familiar with the details of what that rebellion looked like, but as a factual matter, notwithstanding Nat Turner's standing order to kill all whites, it occupies an honored place in American history. For me, the interesting question is not just the rebellion itself, but the judgment, the moral judgment cast by the most exemplary figures in American life at the time. They were called the abolitionists, and they also occupy a very honored place in American history. People like Charles Sumner, Wendell Phillips, William Lloyd Garrison, and others. So I went back and looked at what did Garrison have to say about the Nat Turner revolt. And it's a very interesting fact. I hope some of you will have a chance to look at it. I posted parts of it, a large part of it, on my website, on my Substack. On William Lloyd Garrison, one of the leading abolitionists, he had a newspaper called The Liberator, and The Liberator was devoted to fighting the cause of immediate emancipation of the slaves. I don't have time now to quote from that document, but I'm going to just give you the bottom line. He starts out the document by saying, "We told you so. We warned you and warned you and warned you," speaking to whites now. "We warned you and warned you and warned you. If you keep these people in this condition, if you perpetuate this condition, this is going to happen." Number two, he castigated, he attacked the white hypocrites who spoke so eloquently about the liberation struggles of the French during the French Revolution, of the Greeks, of the Poles, how they upheld the principles of liberty and all such things, but they never applied it to Black people. And he called them all a band of hypocrites, and he ridiculed all of their protestations of enlightenment. He then went on to say that what the rebels did, he said it could not be justified. He did say that. He went on to say that what happened in the rebellion was shocking. But the most revealing thing about what he said was what he didn't say. You can read every word of William Lloyd Garrison's account of the Nat Turner Rebellion. I would add it took a huge amount of courage, physical, raw courage. William Lloyd Garrison did not condemn the rebellion. He didn't approve it, but he did not disapprove it. He did not condemn it, but he did not condone it. He was what you might call, I think the proper term is, he was morally neutral on the subject. And in my view, obviously reasonable people can disagree, in my view, his refusal, notwithstanding a lot of pressure, he was told, don't go south because you're not going to come back. Notwithstanding a lot of pressure, he stood firm because he understood, here I'm interpreting for him, he understood the condition of the slave. And he said at one point, you don't have, because the abolitionists were being blamed for the slave rebellion. And he said, the Nat Turner rebellion. And he said, they don't need us to have an incentive to go on a murderous rampage. He said, their lacerations, their humiliations, the physical assaults on them, the moral assaults on them, and he goes through the whole list of the way the slaves are treated. He said, without us, they would have harbored the same rage and fury as if we didn't exist. And I think it was his daily confrontation with the reality of the life of the slave that forced him, compelled him, morally compelled him to not condemn them. And in my view, honest people can disagree, fair-minded people can disagree. I believe on the moral question, we should get inspiration from the attitude of the most revered figures of the pre-Civil War period, namely the white abolitionists, and to point the finger at those who drove these people mad. The condition that they were forced upon them, that condition drove them mad. And I feel the same verdict applies to what happened in Israel on October 7th.
Thank you, Zeba. Dr. Finkelstein. The next speaker is Nadia Najeb. Excuse me again, Dr. Nadia Najeb. Please, Dr. Najeb, after you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Excuse me, everybody, if I may interfere. I'm sorry. We're just now getting a news of one of the worst crimes ever, an attack on the Mehmedani hospital, hosting refugees as well as hundreds of injured people. There is at least 500 people dead in this last 10 minutes. 500 martyrs of injured people in a hospital and people refuging from their houses to the hospital. I think we should stand for a minute of silence before we continue. Thank you.
Dr. Najeb, if you would like to speak.
Yeah, actually, this is what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about the danger of the present media coverage. And because of this danger, Palestinians are losing their lives constantly. I'd like to start with a quote from the novelist Murid Barghouti from his novel I Saw Ramallah, when he came back from exile, reflecting on Prime Minister Rabin's speech at the signing ceremony for Oslo in the White House. And I'm quoting now. I mean, he's reflecting on his speech. It is easy to blur the truth with a simple linguistic trick. Start your story from secondly. Yes, this is what Rabin did. He simply neglected to speak of what happened first. Start your story with secondly, and the world will be turned upside down. Start your story with secondly, and the arrows of the Red Indians are the original criminals, and the guns of the white man are entirely the victim. It is enough to start with secondly, for the anger of the black man against the white to be barbarous. Start with secondly, and Gandhi becomes responsible for the tragedies of the British. And this is exactly what is happening now. In an updated version of a book, Bad News from Israel, in 2011, academics from Glasgow University Media Group studied the coverage of Palestine, Israel, and the impact of this on public opinion. They found that the coverage and the stories lack historical context and the origins of and causes of events. They found that their focus groups, mainly from higher education, believed from this news coverage that were, first of all, unaware of the Israeli occupation, and some of them believed that Palestinians are the occupiers. Silencing Palestinian narrative is not new. It's in the making since the British Mandate, and it's ongoing. But what is different today is that the narrative, of course, Israel criminalized the narrative and targeted Palestinian identity. In the West now, it is, or they are trying to criminalize it. No, not a single Western government paid attention to what the Israeli president, when the Israeli president said it's the whole nation that is responsible for what Hamas did, which makes every Palestinian, not only in Palestine, but every Palestinian resident of the West, a target, vulnerable, not feeling safe, if the whole nation is responsible. Not a single prime minister paid attention to that, let alone human animals. And before that, there were so many quotes, nobody paid attention to it. So it's a preparation for the ground to criminalize Palestinian narrative. Yesterday, I listened to Rishi Sunak, the UK Prime Minister. Not a single time he mentioned Palestinians. Here's what he said. He vowed to ensure that our Jewish community is able to feel safe in our streets, and there is no place in our society for anti-Semitism. Trying to appear partial, he said, we stand with British Muslim communities too. Palestinians are not only Muslims. Palestinians are Muslims and Christians. And there is an identity, it's called Palestinian identity. He did not refer to it a single time. Instead, here's what he said. He emphasized that the government had given the police all the tools and powers and guidance they needed to police pro-Palestinian protests over the weekend. I think what is going on amid this silence for us, Palestinians, and of course our allies, but mainly Palestinians, this is permission to exterminate Palestinians. The leaflets distributed in Gaza for Gazans in the north to evacuate evokes Nakba. Similar leaflets distributed to Palestinians in Lid and Ramle. You either leave or die. We have to work together to counter the narrative. We have to work together to challenge those Western governments on, of course, the legal. I cannot speak about the legality of that because they are complicit of what is going on right now. I think this is what we need to look at because we don't feel safe here. We don't feel safe. I know cases where people were targeted in the streets, being called terrorists. We have seen what happened in the United States, the hate crimes. We need to work together to ensure the protection of Palestinians and their freedom of speech and their freedom to express themselves and help their people. We are not allowed to support our people there. Everything could be interpreted as either anti-Semitism or support of Hamas. So Palestinians, Palestine is reduced to the context of religion nowadays. So I hope we can discuss this together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Excuse me. Bilal, please, after you.
Well, I chose to speak on the humanitarian crisis. Crisis scarcely describes what is happening now, and I think that the Israeli position is increasingly clear, and increasingly the devastation, the destruction being rained down on the people of Palestine needs to be acknowledged. And Dr. Naji mentioned Rishi Sunak. I was at an event a couple of days after the 7th October attack, and he proudly said the flag of Israel flies over the House of Parliament, and he gave then a blanket support to the Israelis, as indeed Western leaders and much of, as points already been made, Western media have done. What that does is, and I think it's a very good phrase, decontextualizes and enables this humanitarian disaster. It is, a colleague of mine described the forced march of Palestinians to the south as a death march. It is a second Nakba. I was reading an article. One reads so much and sees so much horror, but I was reading an article in the Globe Mail, which is a Canadian newspaper. I'm Canadian as well, and in the midst of all of this, it really hit me. I just want to read a little bit about this particular situation. There's a Canadian pediatrician who was at El Shifa Hospital, and he has roughly 40 newborns on his patient roster, most kept alive by an array of ventilators, incubators, and monitors. As of Monday evening, he was told the hospital's electrical generators would run out of fuel in 24 hours. If we run out of electricity, that's it. They will die on the spot, he said of the babies. Israel has ordered the city's residents, including the hospitals, to empty out and move south. But moving the newborns, as well as patients on ventilators, dialysis, and other mechanical interventions would be logistically challenging. Most patients we have would not survive. This recalled to me what the Khmer Rouge did in the mid-70s, where they emptied out the cities in Cambodia and forced people out of the hospitals. This is the level of the humanitarian crimes that are now being inflicted upon the Palestinian people. And they Israelis are empowered, as I think the point's been made, but I think it's worth making again, by the silence or the acquiescence or the acceptance of the narrative of the Israelis, which is, if you do not denounce Hamas, you support Hamas. You must denounce Hamas. You must denounce their actions, but you must not say anything about ours, because if you do, that shows that you support Hamas. This is an indefensible position, but one which, as Dr. Najj has pointed out, has been taken up by our prime minister. And one wonders how anyone looking at and reading and learning of, as we've just learned, the further atrocities being committed by the IDF on the Palestinian people, how anyone could not speak out. And yet we see it over and over again, that our leaders hesitate or do not simply say what needs to be said. So this is, and I think the idea that, you know, there's this sort of shock and awe approach that the Israelis have taken, more than 3,000 dead, over 1,000 of those children, that now they may take a different approach. That is, they'll scale down the level of the atrocities, but the atrocities will continue. And then I think that we all have to, you know, I'm a journalist. We need to keep this story in front of people's eyes. We need to address it. We need to challenge the narrative that the Israelis, the IDF, the regime, the fascist government of Netanyahu is foisting upon all of us, because I think there is another narrative, and that narrative is that yes, you can denounce what Hamas did. I think the killing of all civilians is wrong, but that doesn't mean you don't denounce, and even more vociferously, I believe, what Israel is doing now to the Palestinians. I think I'll just leave it there, and I want to thank AOHR, but also I'm deeply moved by the colleagues that have spoken before me, and I look forward to hearing from other colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Adam Shapiro. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you to all my colleagues, including I saw that Rami has had to go, unfortunately, because he's lost family members in this latest strike at the hospital in Gaza. And it is very difficult to speak at this point, but I was asked to speak about the Western efforts, Western governmental efforts to silence Palestinians and solidarity voices for Palestinians in our own countries. And I think we have to understand that at this moment of unprecedented attack on Palestinians in Gaza, but not only in Gaza, also in the West Bank, that this extension of the Zionist effort to silence and quash the Palestinian narrative, the Palestinian perspective, and indeed our actions has extended into our own countries in the West. Here in the United States, while we have and are seeing a growing mobilization of protests by civil society, by different groups, including labor unions and others, we are also seeing the criminalization of Palestinians. There have been a few Palestinians who have been here for asylum purposes, who've been detained by the immigration authorities and who are facing expulsion from the United States, seemingly without any pretext whatsoever. We are seeing efforts, non-governmental efforts, but nonetheless efforts at elite levels to target those who are speaking out on behalf of Palestinians, including employers who are either rescinding job offers, or by academics who, just in the Wall Street Journal yesterday, a prominent legal scholar at Stanford University has called, University of California, has called on law firms not to hire his students who are supporting Palestinian rights. We have also seen people being evicted from their homes by landlords, Muslim people who are in their appearance, particularly hijab women who are Muslim, and of course, most horrifically, the stabbing to death of a 6-year-old boy by a landlord who was basically listening to media coverage of what's going on, and somehow that turned him created a murderous rampage of a Palestinian American boy in Chicago, in the Chicago suburbs. In France, we're seeing the authorities crack down, prevent protests. They've arrested, authorities in France have arrested a leader in the Jewish community for carrying a Palestinian flag at a protest, someone from the Jewish community who opposes what Israel is doing and what France is doing. We've seen the arrest of a prominent Palestinian activist, allegedly for being a risk to public order because she is a member of the PFLP, and so she has been detained and faces expulsion from France. She was on a speaking tour prior to this event starting on October 7th. We've seen German authorities ban all manifestations. This actually has happened even before this week. It started last May, or it picked up last May with Nakba Day commemorations that were scheduled to be held. So we've seen a complete effort to silence in Germany Palestinian voices and Palestinian perspectives by the authorities. And this is something that's happening even as I said, we are seeing massive mobilizations of people opposing not just what Israel's doing, but their own government's complicity in the crimes that are happening. And I think at this point, with President Biden from the United States on his way right now on Air Force One, seemingly taking off in the plane just before Israel carried out this airstrike on a hospital in Gaza, heading over to Israel and allegedly planning to attend Israel's war cabinet tomorrow, which would of course make him implicate him in any decisions or any actions that were taken out of that meeting that would constitute war crimes. As our governments are lining up in support and aiding and abetting war crimes on Palestinians in Gaza, we are seeing the mass mobilization of people, and I think we'll see it in coming days even more than before. And we are seeing a crackdown. We're seeing arrests. We're seeing efforts to silence the Palestinian narrative on social media. The platforms are silencing and shadow banning and taking other steps to remove Palestinian content, any content that challenges the dominant narrative. We're seeing media outlets refusing to give equal space to Palestinian voices. Sometimes they're contacting people to speak and then stringing them along for hours before denying them the opportunity to respond, even as they give ample opportunity not only to Israeli government spokespeople, but also to the family members of some of the victims in Israel to go into great detail about the traumas that they've experienced while refusing to give similar kind of opportunities for Palestinians, and thus trying to shape the public perception. I think it's largely not working. But I think it's very dangerous at the moment, and certainly for those of us in the community that are standing up and speaking out, we are aware that, at least here in the United States, I could speak where I'm speaking from, we are aware that there are threats to our lives, threats to our protests, but on social media, the authorities are reluctant to investigate and are reluctant to provide protection. I participated in a protest here in the Detroit area where I'm based over the weekend. And while we had a few thousand people turn up on a rainy day, the police presence was minimal. And while in previous years, we might have welcomed a minimal police presence. The fact is that there was a direct threat made to our protest over the weekend, and we did not see the same kind of response from the police, even as the police are taking steps to secure and provide protection to Jewish American institutions on the alleged notion that Hamas has lone wolf actors around the world, for which there is absolutely no evidence, and for which there is, it seems to be one of these made up kind of fictions to justify not only this protection effort, but also the demonization of Palestinians, all Palestinians, regardless of where they are. So that, unfortunately, is the status we're living in right now. And so this, while the war, of course, and it's not a war, while this assault and attack on Palestinians is occurring on the ground and devastating to Palestinian lives and communities and futures, we also have to be aware that the attack is also ongoing on Palestinians outside of Palestine as well. again, something that we've seen before in the past, but this is certainly at unprecedented levels and in coordination with the Western government response that's also unprecedented in terms of its support for the government and its war crimes. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. I'm going to have to briefly interrupt the speakers to say that Rami Shath had to leave the discussion and won't be able to speak because of bombing of the Ahli Baptist hospital in Gaza City. And I have been told that Rami has family in the hospital, and so on behalf of the organization, I'd like to extend our sympathy to the Shath family and our solidarity too.
Sorry, can I also just make sure that Naima is okay? Naima, are you following up?
Well,
Are you with us?
To be honest, I'm not okay. I have not read the news yet. You know, I just don't want to read them right now because there is something important that I need to say in response to what has been said during this meeting. I feel so dehumanized because of what the second guy after Ilan Pape said. You know, two of the things he said was that Gaza is part of Israel. This is a complete denial of my identity as a Palestinian. And you know about the history of ethnic cleansing and genocide. First, they start with the denial of the existence of the people and the denial of their identity, and then dehumanization. And that has been happening, and more recently, most recently, and most noticeably, we were called human animals. And then the step of genocide comes. I would like him to apologize for saying that Gaza is part of Israel. Gaza is not part of Israel. Gaza is part of the historic Palestine, which was occupied, and then an entity called Israel was established on it. The second thing, he has been comparing us to slaves. We're not slaves. We weren't brought in a free trade deal to Palestine. We are the indigenous people of Palestine, and this is called resistance. And the Palestinians have been going through several levels of consciousness. At the beginning, we were completely passive because we were completely shocked with the displacement of the Palestinians. And then we became critical. We started to question why was that happening to us as Palestinians. And then we had the resistance consciousness where we had the first and second intifadas and many other incidents in Palestine. And now, happily and proudly, we have reached the revolutionary consciousness. And please have a look at how many people have been killed during the last few days. I do not accept this, and I wanted to leave. You know, as soon as I heard him saying this about Palestine and the Palestinians, but I wanted to, at the same time, I wanted to stay out of respect for the person who invited me, out of respect for my supervisors, Dr. Nadia Najab and Professor Ilan Pape. So yeah, I really don't know what to say, honestly.
Naima, as the chair and the representative of the organization, I would like to speak to each point you've raised very briefly about what Norman Finkelstein said. Firstly, when Norman said that Gaza is part of Israel, he, I believe, didn't mean to say that Gaza is properly part of Israel.
Yeah. Due respect, but I don't care. My identity was denied, and I have the right to say this is wrong. It happened, and it is wrong.
What he meant was that
I don't care what he meant. He denied my identity, my existence in this world. the existence of my people. And this is one of the main reasons why my people are being killed. My sister is injured and her children are injured. My relative has been killed. My family, I don't know anything. I don't know anything about the rest of my family right now. Is that okay? Is that like
Naima,
is there an
Naima.
excuse for this?
No, it's we understand, but let him explain to you what he meant. Just a second.
On the first point, he did not mean that Gaza should be a part of Israel and that it should be, for example, free of Palestinians and instead part of a Jewish supremacist state. He said that he meant to say that in practical terms, Gaza is ruled over by Israel. I ask for a little trust when I say I understand your anger. I believe Professor Finkelstein is in fact a great advocate for Palestinian liberation. On the second point, very briefly, I believe his comparison of specifically Gazans to black slaves in the antebellum South in America was for him he meant it as the analogy as he meant it positively. He meant to praise the Palestinians for their determination and to give a legitimacy to their struggle, your struggle for liberation. Yeah. But again, I totally understand that this analogy might be understood as somehow insulting, and perhaps Mr. Finkelstein might have chosen his words a little better given who's on the call and so on, but perhaps, if you want to respond, please.
As a person who is under massive discourse attack, I know, he came to support Palestine and he has joined this group. Of course, he is a supporter of Palestine, but we need to be conscious of the language we've been using at all times.
Okay.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry for getting emotional, but this is the least thing that has to be done.
I totally understand, and please don't apologize. If we can continue, our next speaker is Ahmed Abu Fool. Ahmed, after you, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's quite difficult to speak after the speakers and receiving the news of the targeting of Al Ahli Hospital in Gaza. Reports coming from Gaza directly that the number of victims has exceeded 800, including doctors, nurses, and also civilians who sheltered in the yards of the hospital. This is a dark day in humanity. This will remain a stain in humanity that history will remember. This is what the West is supporting and enabling, and this is this is the result of the international community's silent on what Israel is committing in Palestine, which are indisputably war crimes, crimes against humanity, and also arguably, as we have seen, there are serious allegations of genocide, considering the statements that we heard from Israeli officials. It appears that the Israeli apartheid regime has announced a total warfare against the Gaza civilian population. And to put things into context, we're talking about 2.3 million Palestinians that have been taken hostage and locked in a tiny strip of land that does not exceed 365 square meters. This is one of the most densely populated areas on the face of the earth. Just to put things into context so viewers understand what we're talking about here. The Gaza Strip has been under suffocating military blockade for over 16 years. In 2012, the UN issued a report entitled 2020 Gaza Livable? And the report says that by 2020, the situation in Gaza will render it unlivable. We're 3 years beyond that, and the Palestinians are still steadfast and resilient on their land. And now the Zionist ideology, the Zionist project, is aiming to ethnically cleanse the Palestinians that they've always viewed in the Gaza Strip in particular, that they've always viewed as a demographic threat, quote unquote. Shameful on international community that the Israeli apartheid officials are openly calling to ethnically cleanse Palestinians and push them to Egypt and to Sinai. Just to put things into context, and considering the serious allegations of a genocidal intent that is being declared by Israeli officials, it's particularly alarming what the Israeli defense minister said, and I quote, he told the world openly, "We are imposing a complete siege on Gaza. No electricity, no food, no water, no fuel. Everything is closed." And he also referred to Palestinians as human animals. As Israeli apartheid prime minister bragged about his military force, saying that he would reduce Gaza into rubble. These statements show unequivocally the intention to target civilians. One doesn't need a lot of information. Just look at the death toll and the segments of society that are being targeted in Palestine. The vast majority of people who have been killed by Israel and injured in Gaza Strip are civilians. Most of them are children and women. Is this the Israeli targets? I think it is indeed, because Israel is targeting the very existence of the Palestinian people. What Israel is doing is a collective punishment that is directed against the Palestinian people, against their very existence. One must always understand that it is essential in this particular situation that the international community and public opinion understands and address the root causes of this situation. And that this is only the current escalation, that what we're having at the moment, it was a matter of when, not if. Israel cannot seriously have expected to log for 16 years, 2.3 million Palestinians, and expect them to be good victims. We've warned as human rights organizations for years that this will happen. I stormed European capitals warning that we are in a very serious situation where the Palestinians are left with no option, and there is no political prospect, and Israeli oppression and apartheid is entrenching and is continuing to oppress the Palestinians, and the result will be catastrophic. And the war did nothing. It is a shame on the international community that Israel is implementing a 21st century apartheid regime against the Palestinian people, and no action has been taken yet. The world is watching. This is not you. The Palestinians have been denied their unalienable rights for over 75 years, especially their right to return and the right to self-determination. It's important also to note that over 70% of the Gaza population are refugees that are waiting for their right to return to be implemented, to go back to their homes and villages from which they were ethnically cleansed in 1948. I am one of them. I spent my whole life in Gaza. I grew up in Gaza. My family is still in Gaza, and I was born as a refugee in Gaza. It's quite disturbing to hear from Israeli officials saying that why Egypt doesn't open the borders for the Palestinians. It's quite preposterous. As a matter of fact, my hometown, my home village, Hamama, is closer to Gaza than to Egypt. Israel needs to allow the Palestinians to return to their homes and villages from which they were ethnically cleansed. They have the right to return. Israel's settler colonial project must end. And in fact, what the West is doing at the moment is just confirming that its support is coming from the similarities from the colonial nature of the Israeli regime and the colonial history in Europe, and the crimes that have been committed in that era. And to conclude with demands, it's important that the international community take urgent actions and stop this insanity, stop this attack on civilians, and protect civilians in Gaza. There are legal obligations on the international community to act and prevent such the commission of war crimes and crimes against humanity. The prosecutor of the International Criminal Court should expedite its investigation and start issuing arrest warrants for those responsible for serious crimes. And on the hypocrisy and the double standards, if I may, only few months ago, last year, for example, we've seen European officials and European leaders calling out Russian crimes and calling the cutting of electricity and water as an act of terror. Why don't we see the same statements now? Aren't the Palestinians equal human beings? We've seen mainstream Western media teaching people how to make Molotov cocktails on TV. This was okay. This was a right to resist, rightly so. But the Palestinians don't have a right to resist, don't have a right to achieve the right to self-determination. The Western hypocrisy is unspeakable, to be honest. It's quite astonishing that the West is still implementing its double standards when it comes to Palestine. This undermines the whole system. We're left in a situation where people in the global South, more generally, but in Palestine in particular, are questioning what's the point of any political solution? What's the point of recoursing to international law if it seems to be that is not for the Palestinians? This leaves the public with a very awkward situation where they have to wonder, is it that the Palestinians don't have the right skin tone to deserve these rights? Is it that the Palestinians are not white enough for the West to treat them as equal human beings? We should call the hypocrisy for what it is. It's a shame on this international community. It's a shame on the West that this is happening in the 21st century. We're seeing an apartheid regime, a settler colonial regime, and the longest occupation in modern history committing these heinous crimes with no word of condemnation, no call for ceasefire, no even attempt to hold Israel accountable or even calling for accountability. And I will end with that. I think the missing piece in this situation is accountability. The reason that Israel continues to commit its crimes is because the world has provided Israel with impunity, absolute impunity for its crimes, and therefore Israel does not feel there is a reason for it to stop its crimes against the Palestinian people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mahmoud Wahba, you have the floor.
I'm going to start with my feelings and then explain them. I have lived in the States for over 55 years. I've gone through ups and downs in the relationship between Israel and the Arabs. I'm totally outraged at Biden and the White House, his entire administration. Biden, in a bold lie, started saying that he's seen pictures of 40 children that their head were cut, and that he's seen pictures of women who were raped. Then he translated that immediately to Hamas, so reduced the entire Palestinian issue to Hamas. Palestinian issue is much more. It's liberation. It's freedom from an imperialist state that's one of the last ones around. Meanwhile, Biden himself is supporting the Ukrainian against an attempt to occupy it by Russia, and just doing the opposite with the Palestinians. He is supporting the occupier. He added to that this is ISIS-like action, It's like 9/11 in the States, which brings it closer, unfortunately, to the emotion of the public. And he made it sound like it's a religious war. He didn't say it, but the supporters, by and large, talked about that. Then he proceeded to send military equipment and allowed Israel, that actually has a storage of American military set in the side, to use it. He sent carriers that has abilities to start a nuclear war to a small little place. My attempt to understand this is as follows. One, and this is Bernie Sanders mentioned it, the attitude of the Americans was somehow being improved toward the Palestinian and declining for the Israelis. Two, Biden is an election within a year and a half. Three, which is probably the most significant thought I want to bring to you, is this. The whole world hears about Israel as invincible country. It's a country that never lost a war. And that is true because the country was always on the offensive. When Israelis in the offensive, they use airplane, they use missiles, they use any form of air power that does not see the destruction that they make. The Hamas and other groups in one single day with 1,200 people turned the story around. Israel is no longer an invincible country. Israel is a strong country when it's in the offense. It's a weak country when it's in the defense. Even until today, most of what they do is still the same, namely that they bomb, but they cannot be even sure until today if all of the Palestinian activists, if you use that word, are out. An invincible country that won 6 days war suddenly lost a war in 1 day. So you have the 6 days war and you have the 1 day war. The 1 day war, Israel lost. Israel is, for whatever reason, is the tool of the West to dominate the entire Arab world. Not only the Palestinians, but a tool to dominate the entire Arab world. If Israel can be defeated in 1 day by 1,200 people, Israel is no longer a safe place. It's not a place that will grow or you could rely on. And the beginning of the end will start. So he overacted to the point that his entire security, national security staff is in Israel. His Minister of Defense is in Israel. His Minister of Foreign Affairs, Secretary of State, is in Israel, and he himself is going. And as somebody said earlier on, he is joining in at least 2 crimes. The first one is a simple genocide. What happened in the hospital, and I am so touched what happened, is a genocide. You put people within 25-mile length of land and 5-mile width and say, move from here to there, and then you bomb things to the ground. You bomb every section in it to the ground. And then you say, I'm not going to give you water, I'm not going to give you. Now, how could anybody in his right mind agree to such terms? How could you agree to a ethnic cleansing in that fashion? That's an international law. A country that occupies another country has obligation that it has to meet. Israel doesn't meet any of them. The people that are occupied have the right to defend themselves, and that's precisely what Hamas did. My reading, frankly, is that this is a beginning of a decline. I do not see them winning a war by going into Gaza. And if they go into Gaza, they're not going to come out. They got about 200 to actually about 250 hostages. They are not going to come out. And Biden is going there to join in these crimes. Rather than going in there and trying to find a solution, he is going there to help Israel with about 2,000 specialists to help them track Hamas. I'll end it here and I'll come back. I just have to say one sentence about the issue of Palestinians or Gaza as slaves. I am afraid that this is a mischaracterization. I appreciate the gentleman who talked. Probably he talked as a scholar. He picked up just the wrong analogy. It's not slavery here. There's no slavery, and there is also, by the way, there is no other country under occupation except Palestine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Naima, if you'd like to speak, the floor is yours.
Did you ask me to talk?
I did, yeah.
Yeah, so there is nothing to be said, honestly. You can't see the news now. And I still not know whether my family, any of my family members is at the Ma'madani hospital now, especially that they live in Gaza and they live near that hospital. My sister got injured yesterday with her children. My relative got killed the day before yesterday. She's just a child. She's 16 years old, and her whole family are injured and they are at the Shifa hospital. You know, the situation is inexplicably horrific. And, you know, I think you do have access to news. I'm really unable to talk any further. I'm sorry for this.
Yeah, I think it's difficult for Naima right now. The news is terrible, to be honest. Yeah.
Okay, Joel, let's move to Muhammad Ismail.
Muhammad, are you Naima, of course, the organization and the audience understands and just simply thanks you for your presence and offers its sympathy and solidarity again. The final speaker is
Muhammad Ismail. Are you?
Yes, I was not able to talk. I was trying to get it to open, but it didn't. The administration, I don't think they were supposed to allow me to open. But anyway, I'm not gonna talk long. Here, I live in the States. I'm actually at work right now, but I took some times for a couple minutes to say a word. My name is Muhammad Ismail, and I am the Director for Egyptians Abroad for Democracy. My condolence to all of us. I'm not going to say to the Palestinian. I'm going to talk to humanity in general. Just to understand what's happening, and in order for us to know what we need to do, we need to understand the consequences of the unfolded crisis. Why we're seeing a daily attack, killing kids, destroying hospitals on purpose, killing civilians on purpose. Why we're doing that? Unfortunately, I'm going to say this, and this is sad news to say, this is not going to stop until the conspiracy or until the deal of the century accomplished. The mission is accomplished. If we look back in the days, General Sisi, when he was talking to President Trump, and he said, talk about the deal of the century. What is the deal of the century? The deal of the century is ending the right of the Palestinians to go back to their homes. Ahmed touched on that from a human rights point of view. I wanted to highlight that. Why? What is the safe pass? When the White House talk about a safe pass, what is the safe pass? The only way a safe pass is to find a safe area in Gaza and to prevent the Israeli strikes to come right here near to that. But what they're talking about going to Sinai, the goal is to open the door and the gates to the Palestinians, not just in Gaza, all the refugees, to take over Sinai. That's why President Sisi or General Sisi has been planning this, a conspiracy for years, completely deporting the people of Sinai, different cities and all of that. As I said, in order for us to know what happened and how to stop it, we have to expose the conspiracy. There is a conspiracy taking place right now, not to end the war, not to end killing the civilians. It will actually increase on a daily basis. And all what you see from the trucks that need to go to Sinai, or to go to Gaza from Egypt to help the people of Gaza, this is a game. We need to know this is a game. General Sisi is waiting for the election to be over with, and then they already have communication with Israel and United States. And this is not secret. The White House already talked about that. They said, we've been talking to Egypt, we've been talking to Israel about opening a safe pass for Palestinians. Why are you opening a safe pass inside Egypt? Why don't you choose a safe pass inside Gaza? So my advice to each and every one of you, my advice to the Palestinian, especially the people in Gaza, to expose the deal of the century. It's not a secret. It's not a conspiracy theory. I actually put it all over the social media. I put it on my account in Twitter. A lot of people shared it. We're making a movie, a small documentary movie for 10 minutes. It's in English, it's in Hebrew, it's in Arabic. It will launch tomorrow. We'll launch it tomorrow. And I would like each and every one of you to watch it, to understand what's going on. Again, in order for you to stop what's going on, you need to understand the goal of all this killing. Do you think Blinken is going to visit, has been going all over the Middle East to Egypt and the Arab countries to stop the killing or the murder of the Israeli? No, to put the guidelines how to stop, how to achieve this conspiracy ASAP, or to achieve the deal of the century. I'm done speaking. My advice again to the Palestinians, and especially the people of Gaza, to come out loud and talk about that and say, we're not leaving our land. If you want to have a safe place, safe pass for us inside our own home country, we're welcome. The Egyptian, the authorities should open the gates for first aid, for help, for food, for electricity, for all of that, but not to have a new home to the Gaza people or to the Palestinian, to end. The goal is to end the right of return, to end the whole Palestinian case. I'm done speaking. Mohammed Ismail from USA, Egyptians Abroad for Democracy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Typically, we follow speakers' remarks with a period of discussion. I must say this evening has been very difficult for the obvious reasons. But nevertheless, if anybody would like to extend on their talk or perhaps respond to another's remarks, then we can leave 10 or 15 minutes to do so.
I'm
perhaps if you
I'm really sorry, but I need to go and follow up what's going on. I just I can't. It's difficult for me.
I totally understand.
I'd like to thank you so much for organizing this, Khulud and Joe for facilitating this. It's great to get together, but as you see, things are developing in a very
I agree. I
welcome,
totally agree.
I think we should end it now.
We should end this. Yes. This is a dark day in humanity. Out of respect, we need to stop this and go to do our works. This is a day history will remember, and the blood of those innocent children is in the West hands on this so-called civilized world that is watching the Palestinians being massacred without saying any word and remaining silent. So I agree we should end this, and thank you for organizing it.
Thank you very much for all.
Thank you.
Thank you all again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
With everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.